Good evening. I'd like to welcome everyone to our MSIG webinar, Adaptive Sports, USOPC, the first of a two-part series on adaptive sports. We're honored to feature three speakers who will share their expertise on adaptive sports and their journey and their role with the USOPC. Dr. Victoria Heasley, Dr. Cheri Blauwet, and Dr. Carrie Jaworski. My name is Milan Patel, and I will be serving as the moderator for tonight's webinar. I'm one of the AMSSM MSIG officers and have been serving this year as one of the at-large MS2 members. I'm a third-year medical student at the Toro College of Osteopathic Medicine, and I'm actually currently doing my sports medicine rotation. After our speakers have finished their presentations, I will serve as a moderator for a Q&A segment. During the webinar, please enter your questions in the chat, and during the Q&A, I'll ask each question entered into the chat and ask our speakers to respond to each question. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Victoria Heasley. Dr. Victoria Heasley is a physician and biomedical engineer whose work focuses on advancing adaptive sports and inclusive athlete care. She founded the UC Adaptive Sports Clinic and co-founded both the nonprofit, the Bridge Adaptive Sports and Recreation, and the UC Collegiate Adaptive Sports Program. She also combines her biomedical engineering background with her clinical interest to design and build adaptive sports equipment and lead interdisciplinary clinical and engineering collaborations. She is the co-director of the UC Biomedical Engineering Medical Device Innovation and Entrepreneurship Program and assists engineers at multiple levels in adaptive equipment design and development. Dr. Heasley also serves as a Paralympic medical classifier for the USA Paratrack and Field supporting national athlete classification. Dr. Heasley, you now have the floor.
Well, thanks for the intro. I just wanted to, I know when the group invited me here, they just kind of wanted to hear about my background and my experience since I've kind of created a non-traditional career and role, I would say. And I've really enjoyed being able to kind of blend my engineering passion and my clinical experience to help with adaptive sports. So just kind of, I have no financial disclosures. And some of my research is funded by grants for AMSSM. So kind of focusing on adaptive sports, research and collaboration. I'm just going to kind of go over some of the collaboration using a lot of different partners to create and advance the field of adaptive sports. And then obviously I'm going to talk a lot about my engineering collaboration and how I'm using both of these, both my backgrounds to work with research, but also development of the actual equipment. So what do I do? So I was a biomedical engineer first, and I ended up deciding to go into medical school. And my dream and goal was to build some sort of medical device. And I didn't know what, and I didn't know how I was going to do that. And luckily, I found the field of physical medicine rehabilitation. And I kind of had this light bulb moment where I could really combine physical medicine and rehab and engineering to build adaptive equipment. And luckily, I started working with a triple amputee who wanted to snowboard again. And so I worked with some other engineers and myself as the clinical perspective and engineering perspective to build devices. And I'd say from that point on, I was hooked. So I chose to do a residency in PM&R. And then I found sports medicine as well and did that fellowship. And it was the perfect blend of, understanding PM&R, sports medicine, and then how can I combine that to take care of our adaptive athletes. And then that also really led into how can I use engineering with that, and fell in love with really designing adaptive sports equipment. And as most of you probably know, adaptive sports equipment really isn't one size fits all. And there's a lot of variability, and a lot of people have very different abilities, and they want to be able to play sports recreationally, competitively. And there might not be an option of equipment out there that works for them. And that's where I like to come in, and I don't like to be told no, and they don't either. And so I want to be able to make that equipment for them. Another area that I think this really started bleeding into for me was I'm in the Cincinnati area. And so I started the nonprofit called the Bridge Adaptive Sports and Recreation. And so really locally running programs for athletes. We have recreation all the way up to competitive, and really being able to be hands-on, figuring out what the athletes need. And this is where it's been really fun for me to experience the sports with the athletes alongside of them, but then also really firsthand understanding what is working for them, what's not working for them, what can we build, what can we design, and how can we fix this for them. And I think that's what's been really exciting is just understanding firsthand with them, but also bringing that back to how can we build equipment. So where I get to kind of wear all of my hats at once is that if we have athletes that need equipment, I can actually take that back to my engineering students. So I'm also one of the biomedical engineering professors. And so I get to work with the students or grad students and say, okay, we need to design something for this athlete to be able to ski again. Or we need to design something so multiple athletes can ski or do sled hockey or do power soccer. And so it's really this amazing opportunity where the engineers get to meet the athlete, get to work with them, get to ask them questions. I get to bring in the clinical side, the engineering side, and really being able to design and build that equipment and then hand it to them. And that's my favorite part, is actually handing something to a person that we've built and worked, and they get to actually go do the activity they thought maybe was never possible for them. Some of the other research within adaptive sports has been working with AMSSM and really looking at just like broad information, looking at survey studies, understanding people's what they perceived ability of sports medicine physicians to effectively treat and manage and the preventative and rehabilitative care of adaptive athletes. So that's really just been gaining a lot of information, and as we're trying to expand education on adaptive sports in general for our sports medicine colleagues. And so it's been great. Here we are. We're having another lecture here, another information session on adaptive sports. And then another thing I've been really fortunate to work with AMSSM and our collaborators with University of Alabama and Harvard and Boston Children's and University of Cincinnati is really working on this multi-site and national study where we're working as this network to get a lot of adaptive athletes information, registry information, understanding when injuries are happening, getting this injury registration, and then also being able to use some successful mindfulness tools and helping athletes kind of cope and go through after they get injured and how they're going to reintegrate back into their competitive space. And so this is still ongoing. I'm still very honored to be involved in this. And we are really trying to understand, again, more about our adaptive athletes in general. And then back to the engineering, because I know that's what you guys had asked me to work on. So these are just some examples of fun things that our engineering students get to work on. So for example, we worked with adaptive ski frame. A lot of the adaptive ski frames that are out there are really bulky, hard to adjust, hard to change in between skiers. So obviously at the Paralympic level, people are going to have custom equipment, and they're going to have things that are customly made for them. But in my realm, in the nonprofit realm, when people want to just come and try skiing for the first time, we want to offer them that opportunity. And so equipment that's adjustable, that can be used maybe, someone who's my size and my abilities, but then also being able to be used by the next person in like 4 more hours is really important. And so things that, adjustable height, and anterior and posterior options, tether options for instructors, really making things that are adjustable, but also customizable at the same time. My engineers love when I tell them that. They really love black and white things, and they don't always get that. So these are just some fun projects that we've been working on and continuing to develop. And it's amazing to be able to see when our athletes get out there and can actually ski. I'm not skiing alongside them. And then this is another example. So power soccer. Power soccer is one of the great sports because people with using power wheelchairs can play soccer. But the chairs themselves for power soccer, the like professional level chairs of our Paralympic athletes, they're super expensive, super customizable. And if people just want to try the sport, they don't want to put that financial investment, right? They don't want to pay for that. And what if they try the sport and they hate it? So that's where we came in, and we're like, how can we just modify quickly one of your everyday power chair that you wheel into practice and you want to try the sport. And so this is again like an ongoing project that we're working on that's can withstand impact, it's adjustable with width, can fit to multiple types of power chairs, and then the athlete can just put this on their everyday power chair, and then they can play a sport. Simple as, right, if maybe an able-bodied person wants to play soccer, they might just need the right cleats and a ball, and they can go play. Simple thing like this is that we can just add this to your chair, and you can get out there and play, and you can get out there and practice. And then engineering research, it's been really, really fun, again, to integrate these two worlds for me. Some of my engineering professors are really interested in and specialize in motion analysis, motion capture. And so being able to work with our adaptive athletes and looking at shoulder biomechanics with our motion analysis lab and doing like finite element analysis on the shoulder for adaptive athletes. So we're not going to talk about engineering stuff, but so just being able to take MRIs of the athlete's shoulders and being able to use and integrate with our motion analysis lab. So this is just casing our performance in neuromechanics lab and being able to do some of those motion analysis studies, what we're working on now. And again, it's been really fun as an engineer, clinician, bringing in athletes, working with other engineers from many different backgrounds to collaborate together. And then the last thing I would say is what's been really fun is medical student design education. And so last year, we've really started working with medical students who aren't engineers or maybe are, but really understanding design and patient-centered design. And we are teaching them how to do lots of different adaptive design. And adaptive equipment design doesn't have to be adaptive sports. But really working with them and being able to talk to patients, athletes, and working with engineers as well, so they can also take these skills and continue in their future career. And that is that. I'm gonna stop sharing.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Heasley, for your amazing presentation. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Cheri Blauwet. Dr. Cheri Blauwet is a senior physician executive and gold medal winning Paralympic athlete, leading at the intersection of health, sports, and optimizing human potential. Having successfully represented Team USA as a 7-time Paralympic medalist and a 2-time winner of both the Boston and New York City marathons, she is driven to lead in high performance environments. She currently serves as the Senior Vice President and Chief Clinical Officer at the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab, as well as Associate Professor of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation at the Northwestern Feinberg School of Medicine. Translating her background as an athlete to the clinical setting, Dr. Cheri Blauwet is a change agent in the area of health equity with a specific focus on sport and physical activity for health promotion and chronic disease prevention. In recognition of her work in 2025, she was named to the inaugural Forbes Accessibility 100 list. She has been named one of Boston's 10 outstanding young leaders by the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce and named as one of the 40 under 40 community leaders by the Boston Business Journal. Her scientific research is focused on injury and illness prevention with particular focus on athlete mental health, concussion, and the unique needs of the female athlete as well as athletes with disabilities. As evidence of the impact of this work, she is invited to provide numerous topics, including multiple keynotes and plenary sessions at major sports, medicine, rehabilitation, and industry conferences. She has published over 100 peer-reviewed papers in distinguished academic journals. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Cheri Blauwet. Dr. Blauwet, please proceed with your presentation, An Athlete's Journey to Leadership, Key Points and Lessons Learned.
Great. Thank you, Milan. This is a very long introduction. I appreciate it very much. Pleasure to be here. And my task for the next several minutes is really to outline a little bit about my personal journey from competing in Paralympic sport to leadership, clinical leadership, working in medicine, and at the intersection of medicine and sports. So really look forward to this and also look forward to questions later. So I have no relevant disclosures regarding the content of this lecture. Okay, so I'm going to take a step back and really bring us on a bit of a journey with regards to my transition from being an athlete to a physician and a clinical leader in medicine. So it's going to be a little bit of a autobiography, but I hope interesting for everyone, and also will end with thinking about lessons learned and some key points from throughout that journey. So although we're on Zoom and it's difficult to tell, I am a person with a disability. I've lived experience as a wheelchair user. I recently relocated from Boston to Chicago, but I was born and raised on a small family farm in Northwest Iowa. I acquired a spinal cord injury when I was 16 months old, so I was quite young, and don't have any recollection of my initial injury, and primarily recall growing up as a young person, self-identifying as a person with a disability and as a wheelchair user. In that time frame, this was 1981 when I experienced my injury, so you can do the math and add up how old I am now. But back in the day, back in the early 80s, there really wasn't a lot of spinal cord injury rehabilitation happening across the US, and certainly not within a pediatric population. So my rehab really happened through living and learning as I went, and thankfully having the support of a lot of incredible people in my immediate environment. I credit a lot of my early self-concept as a person with a disability to my mom, who at the time was a nurse and also evolved into a leadership role in healthcare. And she was really the person who was the first to kind of normalize things. So although I was really the only kid with a disability and the only wheelchair user at our small community school, and there was a significant risk for people treating me differently or lowering expectations, she was always the one who got in there and reminded people that, hey, you know, my kid is bright, my kid is ambitious, treat them like any other kid, challenge them, and let's see, you know, where life can take them. So I went to a public school that was K through 12 all under one roof. And when I initially started school as a person with a disability, I did not gravitate towards sports. The reality is that at the time there weren't a lot of adaptive sports opportunities happening in the rural Midwest, and specifically with a focus on kids. So I started and through all of elementary school, K through 6, didn't identify as an athlete and hadn't really gotten involved in sports at all. I had a really pivotal and important moment when in junior high, our high school track coach saw a wheelchair racing exhibition event at the Iowa High School State Track Meet. And he came back to school and he found me in the hallway and tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Hey, you should come out for the track team." And I told him he was crazy because, you know, I don't play sports. But he was very persuasive and very effective. And with his coaxing over the following academic year, I eventually decided to go out for the track team. We have a lot of funny stories from those early days because I obviously knew nothing about the sport of wheelchair racing, and he really didn't either, but he was a great track coach. So we found a way to rent a racing wheelchair. Dr. Heasley's company and nonprofit was not yet launched at that time. So we found a way to rent a racing wheelchair through a durable medical equipment company. Of course, it fit poorly. It was way too big. But at least it offered me the opportunity to, you know, get in a chair and see and understand what it felt like to compete. I also had another lucky break when at the end of that first track season, I went to that Iowa High School State Track Meet. And we got there, and I ran into a bunch of other athletes who were also competing in the sport of wheelchair racing. And I found out that there was an adaptive sports program happening in Des Moines and also another one happening in Minneapolis. And I started to get connected in with those adaptive sports communities. And that was truly transformative to me because suddenly I had the opportunity to start to re-identify as someone who was more active, who had an athletic identity. And I started to meet other young people, other teenagers who were involved in sports and also who had disabilities. And I really started to find a lot of community in that group and in the adaptive sports world. Prior to that, I had honestly always felt quite isolated as the only kid with a disability or a visible disability in my school. And so it was just super important for both my physical fitness at the time, but also, frankly, my self-esteem and ability to feel comfortable with a group of friends and just, frankly, be a teenager, like all teenagers are. So I eventually started to go and assimilate with this adaptive sports program. And it initially started primarily as a social endeavor because I liked being with the other athletes and being on a team. And with time and over the years, things progressed, and I actually discovered that, hey, not only is this fun, but I'm also pretty good at it. And as I started to head towards graduation for high school, I was still really interested in competing and started to look at colleges and universities that had an adaptive sports program. At the time, for the sport of wheelchair racing, there were really two options, either the University of Arizona in Tucson or the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. And both still have really great broad programs that serve student athletes in a really important way. Because I was a farm kid from Iowa, I thought that Arizona sounded a lot more intriguing than Illinois. So I moved all the way down to Tucson for my freshman year of college at the U of A. And when I started to work out and train with that team in a college environment, and I started to train with other athletes from around the US who were also living this student athlete lifestyle, my skill level also really took off even more dramatically. And when I was a sophomore, I qualified for my first Paralympic Games in Sydney. So this is a picture from Sydney 2000. At the time, I was doing mostly track racing. I know I look like, Carrie's laughing. I look like such a young, I'm so young. Um, and and frankly, this was my first big international trip, my first opportunity, like flying over the ocean, and I was just really wide-eyed and taking it all in. It was an incredible experience and really set the stage for me to start to compete internationally, and again, to understand that I had the potential to compete internationally. That then led to a fairly significant and amazing career in Paralympic sport. I had the opportunity to compete in two more games, in Athens 2004 and in Beijing 2008. And things again really evolved from this mindset of, hey, I can be pretty good at this, to, hey, like I'm actually world class at this. And I think all of us can understand why we love sports medicine, is that we see this journey that people take through the world of sports, where through discovering sports and discovering their talent and setting goals and working with great coaches, we discover so much about ourselves and our own potential. So again, adaptive sports was really, really the lever that transformed my life into totally different and new directions, and really reset my self-concept around someone who could achieve. So over the course of these games, it was an awesome ride. All the games were very different. Sydney 2000, again, I was young, very wide-eyed. It was all new. Athens 2004, by then I had progressed to really being like the front runner in a lot of my events. And so it was honestly, I just remember being anxious the whole time. But it was also my most successful games, where I brought home a gold medal in the 800 meters and two bronze in the 1500 and 5000. And then Beijing, I was actually had been competing by that time for several years. So it was not my most successful games from a performance standpoint, but it was just really amazing, because by then I was one of the older folks on the team and got to mentor a lot of other younger athletes. And of course, the Beijing Games were amazing from an experience standpoint. Through that time, I also evolved into doing a lot of road racing. In the sport of wheelchair racing, I always like to say it's sort of a hybrid between track running and cycling, because we do all the track events, but of course we're in this wheeled machine. And so drafting is a thing, coasting is a thing, aerodynamics are a thing, which is very different than, quite a bit different than running. So wheelchair racers do a broader span of distances, because you have to have a really high top end speed on the track. But even in a marathon, you have to have a lot of speed at the end, because there's drafting is a substantial part of the tactics and part of the strategy. And so there's a lot of athletes who cross over from the track to the road, especially in non-Paralympic years. So through the peak of my career, marathon became one of my main events, and I started to race the marathon circuit. And probably the proudest moment in my career was bringing home a win in Boston in 2004 and 2005 in the women's wheelchair division, which was again like another life-changing opportunity from the standpoint of my profile as an athlete, my ability to get sponsorships and support myself financially, and just find a sort of a new level of success. So through this time frame, through my whole athletic career, I never stopped going to school. So I was a student athlete for a very long time, and I competed all through undergrad, and then I also competed through med school. And I specifically really targeted going to med school at a place where I knew they would support my athletic ambitions as well. I ended up at Stanford, which was an amazing experience and was really comfortable for me, because they had had some prior Olympians go through as student athletes as well. So I knew that they got it, so to speak. I took extra time through med school because I took a couple of LOAs, leaves of absence, to compete and train internationally. And when I was winding down my athletic career after the Beijing Games was also when I was winding down and about to graduate medical school. And that created a nice synergy where I could focus less on competing internationally and start to really focus on my residency training. So I ended up going to the East Coast for my internship and residency program. And I really started to spend most of my time focusing on, successfully competing training rather than winning international marathons. So this was quite a transition, but also really, it was healthy for me, because it enabled me to really shift that energy into something new. At the time I started my internship and residency training, again, the status of the integration of disability as a key aspect of diversity in medicine was at a very different place than what it was today. There weren't a lot of wheelchair users across the US who were training with visible disabilities. I was able to find mentorship here and there through kind of one-on-one connections. I'm really happy to say that all of that has changed dramatically. Now there's really a national movement around embracing disability as a really important component of diversity in medicine, whether it's physical disability, sensory disability, different types of learning differences, etc. This hashtag Docs with Disabilities is really popular. There's a lot of people using social media to connect and find mentorship and to get tips, best practices, etc. And what I've learned in my career in medicine is that it's, of course, eminently possible to be a successful physician, even with a physical disability. And it's all about figuring out what type of practice you want to have and how to adapt your environment. And I remember a lot of initial conversations around, well, oh, how is Cheri going to do a surgery rotation? And how is she going to do an OB/GYN rotation? And, you know, frankly, we figured it out one day at a time through my training. And it's interesting now because currently in my clinical practice, really the only adaptation I use is making sure that the exam table in my exam rooms is like the one pictured here, which is kind of the type that you commonly see in PT gyms, so that I can move the patient up and down in order to do an adequate exam or do a procedure, and I can kind of move them to me. Obviously, it would be much harder to practice with those sort of standard, very high tabletop exam tables. And as long as I have an accessible exam table, then I can function in the way I need to function as a physician. So, at the end of the day, I feel like trainees end up crafting your career towards an area where you know you can be successful and where you have a passion for the type of clinical work that you're doing. And I'm very much involved and really a big proponent for advocating for continuing to enhance this aspect of diversity in medicine. So ultimately, this has really enabled me to take my athletic background, that lived experience as a person with a disability, as an athlete, and my clinical background, and to have some really awesome opportunities to be involved in leadership in a way that really impacts athlete opportunities and athlete health and well-being. One of the first significant opportunities that I had was to become involved with the International Paralympic Committee and to serve on their medical committee, where we were really looking to advance research in Paralympic sport, doing injury and illness surveillance at the Paralympic Games and other World Championship level events. And then domestically, here in the US, I had an awesome opportunity in 2017 to join the board of the USOPC and to really, be at the table with other leaders thinking about not just how do we promote athlete health, but how do we promote Paralympic sport writ large. And again, we've seen really tremendous growth of awareness and opportunity around Paralympic sport in the US. There's still so much work to do. I think we can all recognize that, but it's really also incredible to see how far we've come. And it was just a really huge honor for me to have the opportunity to wear my hat as a physician and as a Paralympic athlete within this incredibly esteemed group of people, and to get to know them and to learn from them and vice versa. And using this platform has, enabled me, along with a lot of other leaders across the movement, to really create change and drive change. So one of the biggies was that in 2018, we were able to gain the momentum and get board approval to create parity between medal payments between Olympic and Paralympic athletes. Prior to this, Paralympic athletes made 20% of Olympic athletes or less, around 20% for winning a gold, silver, or bronze. That has now all changed. And really, if you look at some of the latest news coming out of the USOPC, what you'll see is that when they roll out programs now, they roll them out for all athletes. There's not even a question anymore of whether the level of service to an Olympic or Paralympic athlete will be different along most fronts. There's still some areas where more work is needed, but for the most part, all of the athlete benefits, health insurance, medal payments, athlete career advising, et cetera, are all totally available to Paralympic athletes in an equitable way, which is huge progress. Certainly was not the case when I was competing, and I'm so proud of how far we've come. The other thing that we did, other huge moment, was in 2019. We added the word Paralympic to the name of the organization. Again, this was a huge step forward. You can say, okay, it's one word, but it speaks volumes. And I think when you talk about the organization and you you give recognition to the word Paralympic. When you talk about everything the organization does, it makes a huge difference in public perception and sponsorship opportunities and just the resources that we're able to generate for Paralympic sport. There's still a lot of ongoing challenges. I'll point to a couple of them. I think one of the biggest is what is happening at the public school and collegiate level. You know, there's still a lot of work to do. There's a lot of colleges and universities across the US that have really tremendous programs. There's a lot of heterogeneity out there. So in some colleges and universities, adaptive sports sits within the club sport realm or the intramural sport realm. In some colleges, it sits under disability student services. In some, it sits within the athletic department. It's really all over the place, and a lot of it has evolved dependent on where there's a champion and where there's willingness to integrate these programs. There hasn't been a lot of standard setting by the NCAA around adaptive sport, and there's been a lot of talk through different, inclusion forums, et cetera, at the collegiate level about really trying to build out opportunities for adaptive sports similar to Title IX and what we did for women's sports. But I would say that we haven't really yet reached that tipping point of momentum within the collegiate sports sector to really create equitable opportunities. So this is still a big nut to crack into the future. So after all this work, what have we learned? So just a couple of key points from my perspective. It has been really tremendous to see the exponential growth of the Paralympic movement, and with it, what happens as it relates to grassroots opportunities that ultimately enable people to access sports. And those people may someday become Paralympians or not, but either way, they've had the opportunity to learn and to adapt a healthy and active lifestyle. This field of Paralympic sports medicine, the work that we're doing in clinical care and research is really growing at a rapid phase as well. I see so many more trainees interested in adaptive sport. That's why this session is so fantastic, and the session that will follow as well. We need more talented clinicians and researchers involved in this space and really starting to understand how to best care for para athletes. And I wanted to end with just the point that everyone has influence. Don't be afraid to use it. So, those of us here on this panel today, Dr. Heasley, Dr. Jaworski, have all found different ways to kind of get into this space and contribute. Dr. Heasley, using her background as an engineer and bringing that forward to think about more equitable opportunities for athletes to access equipment, custom equipment. Dr. Jaworski taking those amazing primary care skills and really bringing them forward to best serve athletes and the Paris environment. All of us have something to bring to the table, and I hope that we can all really continue to lean in. And I would say that this is an area of sport where we need the excellent clinical care, but we also still need a lot of advocacy. And I think physicians and clinicians end up being physician advocates for our athletes in a lot of ways and in a lot of forums. And I think that's something we need to continue to do, and really proud of that. So thanks for the opportunity. Here's my email address, and I think I'll turn it back to you, Milan.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Blauwet, for your outstanding presentation. It was truly an honor to hear that. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our last speaker, Dr. Carrie Jaworski. Dr. Carrie Jaworski is a board-certified family and sports medicine physician at Intermountain Health Park City, where she serves as the medical director of sports medicine and associate director of sports performance. She is the current president of the American College of Sports Medicine, as well as the head team sports medicine physician for US Ski and Snowboard. With over 25 years in practice, Dr. Jaworski has had countless experiences in leadership and the care of athletes at all levels throughout her career. She is currently the medical director for the Utah Olympic Legacy Foundation and has been their medical director for both the FIS Para-Nordic World Cup and the International Biathlon Union World Cup. Dr. Jaworski had the honor of being a physician at the Salt Lake City Olympics in 2002, was a part of the USOPC sports medicine team for the Tokyo Olympic Games in 2021, and served as a head team physician for Team USA at the Paris Paralympic Games in 2024. She will serve as a Team USA head team physician in 2026 for the Milan Cortina Olympic Games. In her spare time, Dr. Jaworski enjoys all things outdoors, particularly running, hiking, and Nordic skiing. Dr. Jaworski, the floor is all yours, and I will begin sharing your presentation for you.
Thank you, Milan. And Milan's going to be helping because my computer was being silly, so he'll be advancing my slides, so it'll maybe a little less smooth, but we'll get through it, right, Milan? So I just want to first start by echoing what has already been said. I think I'll tell you my story in a moment, but I'm going to first tell you a little bit about what I learned about the Paralympics. So when I was invited to be a head team physician at the Paralympics, my heart kind of skipped a beat. I think I have definitely had some experience with taking care of adaptive athletes, but that's a big leap to kind of step into a head team physician role. So I did a lot of homework, and I will say exactly what Cheri said. Like we all have a place in this environment, and we all can make a difference. And if you're a good physician or just a good person in general, you can be involved in this movement and make a huge difference. So I think that don't let things scare you. One of the things I wanted to go over is just a couple pearls of things that have kind of come up in terms of caring for Paralympic or just para athletes in general, but more importantly about just how to be a good person and how to make a difference. So I will let you go ahead and advance those slides, Milan. And I have no disclosures. I won't go through the classification system because I think that's going to be talked about in a different thing, but I did want us to get a little bit of an understanding of where parasport kind of evolved from. Because I love history, and so I love kind of the background of kind of where we started and where we are, and I know that Cheri gave us a little bit of that as well. So I'll go ahead and have you advance the slide. So the history of Paralympics really goes back to the late 1800s, and there were sports clubs for the deaf. But then in 1948, there were what were called the Stoke Mandeville Games, and this is kind of the initiation or kind of the first start of what then became the Paralympic movement. So there was a hospital in London, and there were service people from World War II that were there, and Dr. Ludwig Gutmann was put in charge of hosting a games. They held it on the same day as the London Olympics back then, and it was 16 injured service personnel from World War II. I love that it included 2 women, but it was 16 people overall, and this is a picture from there. And so they competed in archery. From that, it then became international. The Dutch kind of joined in, and then fast forward to the 1960s, and that was the first official Paralympic Games, and that was held in Rome, Italy. From that first games in 1948 to 1960, a huge increase in the number of participants. It went to 400 athletes representing 23 countries, which is quite incredible. And then in 1976, there was the first Winter Paralympic Games, and that was in Sweden. The Winter Games are always a little bit smaller, but even at that time, there were 200 athletes and 16 countries represented. So if we go to the next slide, you can see over time, there's been an exponential increase in participation, and both in terms of the number of countries in both the Summer and Winter Games, but then also in terms of the number of athletes. So if you go to the next slide, we can talk about an important change came about in 1989 when the International Paralympic Committee was founded, and that was in Germany. And the wording para is Greek for alongside or beside. And so really wanting to align the Olympics and the Paralympics with each other. Up until that point, the games were hosted separately. So in 2001, the IPC and the IOC agreed that they would host the host city. When you were bidding for the Olympics, you would also be hosting the Paralympics. And proud to say Salt Lake, back in 2000, they were the first country to do that. So they were the first country to have the games kind of subsequent to each other. As you saw on the slide just previous, the current Paralympic Games, we had 4,000 athletes competing in the summer, and that was for actually the 2020 Games, and then the 2022 winter, we had 500 winter athletes, and we've even gone up from there since then. Next slide. So what I really love and what's really kind of drawn me to the Paralympic movement is really the goal of what the IPC, what they stand for. And it really is using sports to drive social inclusion. And so the agitos, which is the symbol you see, is Latin for I move. And I would be remiss not to, I know I'm an AMSSM member and an ACSM member, but all of us in sports medicine, the goal is to get people moving. And so that is the same goal that the Paralympic movement has, and generating change both through attitudes, mobility, and opportunity. So I think that is just a really important ideal that we all need to strive for in everything and for everyone. So next slide, please. And then the values. And if you've never had the opportunity to be involved with adaptive sports, or, and it doesn't have to be at a Paralympic level, really these 4 qualities are, I think, what you see time and time again: the courage, the determination, the inspiration, and most importantly, the equality. So this is really what IPC stands for and what we should all be advocating for. Next slide. So I wanted to just take a little bit of time just to show you guys what What are the differences? When, in a lot of this research, I'm going to thank Cheri, because a lot of the work she's kind of helped lead with USOPC and with our international partners, just looking at injury rates and illness in terms of para athletes versus our Olympic athletes. And the numbers are slightly larger. So you'll see that injury rates are a little bit higher with 14.3 per 1,000 athlete days compared to 6.5 in our Olympic athletes, and the higher risk of upper limb injuries for our wheelchair athletes versus lower extremity injuries in an ambulatory athlete. There are, some obvious sports that are at more high risk, which you can read there, but essentially, I think the thing to keep in mind too is that illness can be more common, and what we find is that our Paralympic athletes are less likely to report either injury or illness. A lot of that has to do with the fact that they're used to fending for themselves quite often. They haven't always had an entourage taking care of them. So a lot of times they are very self-sufficient, and they just try to manage things on their own. They're used to having doctor's appointments and having to deal with urinary tract infections, and so they don't always necessarily report that. And so really education for our athletes and making sure that we are communicating in a two-way street so that those things can be addressed more quickly, so that they're not losing time. They've trained their lives for the games just as much as the next person. And so really making sure that they know that those resources are available to them. And so I know that USOPC has done a great job of having those resources available, but just important to keep that in mind. Next slide, please. Concussion is another area where there are some differences. And again, Cheri, we're just going to keep giving you credit for everything. But we have a consensus statement, and I'll show a picture of an infographic, which I think is wonderful, and everyone should have a copy of it. But essentially, the first position statement came out not that long ago, but really understanding that with certain athletes, there are differences in terms of caring for the athlete who may have sustained a concussion. So it's critically important to know that particular athlete's baseline function, having people who can vouch for what their baseline is. So whether that be a family member, caregivers, or member of the athlete's team that can help navigate that if the physician or the healthcare provider that's caring for the athlete isn't familiar with the athlete on a more consistent basis. So I think that that's really important. And there's more research ongoing. And I know there's even stuff that's come out, or there's new research that USOPC is working on as we speak. So next slide, you can see the infographic, which just kind of outlines when we're thinking about concussion and some of the things to consider. When we tell an athlete to rest, if an athlete is using a wheelchair, they're not often able to rest as much as the athlete who is not using a wheelchair. So just things like that, or if they're visually impaired, and how do we test them for the concussion? And so there are some adaptations. And so this, along with the article, is just a good resource to have as you delve into your interest in caring for adaptive athletes. Next slide. Autonomic dysreflexia. This is like, there are whole conferences on this, so I'm just going to touch on it just because I think it's an important thing to understand when caring for an athlete with a spinal cord injury, that this is a medical emergency. So this is essentially, as the picture depicts, it's an abnormal overreaction of the autonomic nervous system. Oftentimes how it presents is with a sudden onset of hypertension, but kind of conversely, you also have, they may be bradycardic, but they'll have facial flushing and sweating and headaches. It's important to recognize this because it needs to be treated immediately. And it's usually provoked, or it is provoked by some sort of noxious stimuli. And so I'll take you to the next slide. Some of the things that can trigger autonomic dysreflexia, you can see listed here. Distended bladder being a primary one, any kind of bowel impaction, any tourniquet type, so pressure on the leg, so the leg straps on a wheelchair that are too tight, and we'll talk about how that can sometimes be done on purpose in a future slide. But there are lots of different things that can lead to the problem, and some of it has to do with restriction and tight clothing at the level below the spinal cord injury. And so what happens when this does present, we go to the next slide, recognizing what is going on, immediately removing the noxious stimuli if possible, loosening clothes or loosening straps, checking a urinary catheter, watching the blood pressure. And it's, again, this is where it's so critical that the athlete has people who know what their baseline blood pressure is, because the numbers might be high for them, even though it wouldn't be considered high in a normal emergency setting. And then applying nitro paste above the level of the injury every 30 minutes to help lower the blood pressure. the information card on the right-hand side of the screen. The Christopher Reeve organization has some really good resources, both for athletes and for providers, to keep their baseline blood pressures on their person and have them available. You know, if we're fortunate at the Paralympic level, oftentimes we know a lot about our athletes, but when you're covering events that may be at the high school or collegiate level, you know, having this information available when you're traveling with a team is really important. Next slide. And then just, again, whole nother conference in and of itself, but just considering the prosthesis and the considerations in terms of fit and how that can impact athlete well-being. So you're thinking about both the prosthetic itself and then adding in travel or illness or injury when there can be swelling and changes to how that prosthesis fits can lead to problems. And so making sure, again, that we're doing frequent skin checks and that the athlete is aware of reporting if there are any issues or problems. And next slide. Similarly, you know, in a seated athlete, considerations for the pressure areas, if again, if it's not fitting properly, or if there's any kinds of other issues that could be leading them to have pressure ulcers or shearing injury. So, and these slides, I want to give credit to Stephanie Tao, who I think is going to speak in part 2 of this series. She does a wonderful job on kind of describing all of this in more detail. So you'll have to wait for that talk. Next slide. And then lastly, just like all of our athletes, para-athletes can dope just like the rest of us. And so we want to be careful. One thing to keep in mind is that a lot of times the athletes will already be taking medications that are on the ban list for the World Anti-Doping Association. So many of the athletes will require what's called the therapeutic use exemption. And so filling out paperwork to basically vouch for the fact that they need the medication for a medical condition. And so there are ways to do that. There can definitely be abuse of that system. And there can also be the classification in and of itself. So how an athlete is classified within their sport, there can be misrepresentation, and that can give a competitive advantage. And performance enhancing drugs are abused within our athletic population. But then boosting is talking about the autonomic dysreflexia. It's when the athlete purposely causes the autonomic dysreflexia in an attempt to improve performance. And this can lead to death, and it was banned in 1994. It is definitely considered illegal, but just remembering that sometimes athletes will do desperate things to try to improve their performance, and so being aware of that when we're caring for athletes. So now we're going to go to the next slide, and this is going to be a little bit brief version of my story. So Cheri mentioned the University of Illinois, and that's where I graduated from my undergrad. So I had some early exposure there to adaptive sports, and they really are kind of, I think, one of the founding fathers, we'll say, within the United States. So I was fortunate to have some great mentors and people along the way there, and that just kind of continued through the rest of my career, just kind of being in the right place at the right time. So if we go to the next slide, I already mentioned the University of Illinois, but then during my fellowship, I did my sports medicine fellowship through Kaiser in Southern California, and we were afforded the opportunity to work with Casa Colina, which is an outdoor adventure and wheelchair sports program. And this really kind of opened my eyes to the less traditional sports. I had seen wheelchair basketball and I'd seen track and field, but I hadn't seen people on the water and doing some very amazing things. And so it really kind of just, again, sparked my interest in this world. Next slide. When I became a fellowship director in Chicago, so I've trained a lot of sports medicine fellows, I really wanted to include that, not being physical medicine rehab. It wasn't part of a regular family medicine training program, but I really felt it was important as a sports medicine educator to make sure that our fellows were exposed to these types of opportunities. So similar to how I had Casa Colina, we got involved with the Great Lakes Adaptive Sports Association. And so got to be race directors for a lot of their events. They had a big spring event, which encompassed many different sporting events. And we would actually have our fellows be the race directors so that they could experience it firsthand. And then fast forward, I've moved out more recently to Park City, Utah. And we are so fortunate because we have all of the Olympic venues from the original 2002 Olympics here in Salt Lake they've been maintained, and they're still being used for both Olympic and Paralympic activities. And so I've got to be involved in the Olympic Legacy Foundation and bringing awareness to adaptive sports, primarily through the Nordic scene. So Soldier Hollow is a stone's throw from my house, and I get to go out there and help out with Paranordic events, which has been quite rewarding. And then next slide. And then that brought me to the right place at the right time to be able to eventually go to the Paris Paralympics. I volunteered when I was just coming out of residency for the Salt Lake Olympics, just as part of the organizing committee. And then as luck would have it, was invited, I don't know, luck, in Tokyo COVID Games. But I was able to go with the delegation to the Olympics for the Tokyo Summer Games. And essentially my job at the games, and this is where, you know, it's not always glamorous. My job was doing all the COVID testing. So when athletes and or staff were exposed, I was stationed in a little room with lots of swabs and things. And so that was my job. But it also allowed me to see some games and to meet some amazing people. And I think because I just did a nice job, I was then given the opportunity to be a head team physician for the Paralympics in 2024. So next slide. I worked at the High Performance Center for Team USA, and I was with a hugely wonderful group of people. And we were fortunate because all the athletes would come through and train in our facility. So this was how they got out of the village and got a little time to themselves. And so we got to talk one-on-one with athletes and really learn their stories. And I think that's probably been the most rewarding thing of this whole experience is hearing the stories and the incredible willingness to share from our athletes. You know, like I said at the beginning of this, I'm a family physician, so I don't have the engineering background or the PM&R experience necessarily with spinal cord injuries, but I can take a really good history and listen to a story and apply what I know about medicine. And I think the athletes really appreciated taking the time to hear their stories and to understand where they're coming from. So I think that would be my advice as you're navigating your future careers. Just be a good person. And I think that goes a long way. I'll show you the next slide, which is just the group of people. I think that, well, it's what we did, which I already told you, which is we had some fun when we were there taking care of mascots as well. But we were really responsible for kind of injury, illness, and participation decisions. But that was as a team. And the next slide will show you the team, which is a group of great, both it was myself and a surgeon and some athletic trainers and a massage therapist and a dietitian. And really the whole group of us kind of day by day made those decisions together. So it was a great experience. And then I think there's one or two more slides. The lessons learned, like I already mentioned, is that no job is too small. So when you're asked to do COVID tests by Dr. Finoff, you say yes. And that pays off in the end because I've got to have great experiences. The bottom left-hand corner is me at the para triathlon. So I helped with that event when I was in Paris, and again, got to meet some incredible people and some amazing athletes. And from there have had some great friendships formed. So if you're kind and you work hard and you show interest, I think that in the end will pay off and you'll be rewarded. And I think that's it. The last slide should just be my email. Oh, last slide for you guys would be important is how do you get involved? So you can become a classifier. I think like Victoria is a classifier, and that's a great way to get involved. Volunteering for the adaptive sports programs in your own communities, volunteering at the national governing body if you have a sport that you're particularly interested in. They're always looking for help. And then USOPC has a volunteer program as well. The local organizing committees are also a great way to get involved. And we have a couple of games coming up in the United States, so both LA and Salt Lake. So I would encourage people to research those. And if you have questions, I'm sure all three of us would be happy to help you navigate that. And my last slide should be my email. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jaworski, for your excellent presentation. Now we'll begin our Q&A segment with our speakers. But I once again want to thank our speaker panel for their very informative and amazing presentations. It was a pleasure to hear all your stories and everything that you guys do for the Paralympic community. So thank you guys. And for our attendees, if you have any questions you would like to put in the chat, or if you would like to unmute, feel free to do so. I see a question in the chat. It was messaged to me. Dr. Heasley, could you please elaborate on how the engineering students evaluate new adaptive equipment, particularly regarding safety testing? Additionally, are the adaptive soccer wheelchair add-ons expected to be made commercially available in the future, or are they intended primarily for local use?
Okay, so sorry. I had to go to my phone and I'm having technology problems. And I couldn't figure out how to mute. Okay. Yeah, so the soccer in general, we're still doing like the safety testing and protocols, but yeah, our goal is for it to be like open source of how to build and make it. And so you could like make it on your own in your own local community and fabricate it that way. Um, but we're still, like I said, going through the safety testing, which is what you also asked in the same question. Yeah, so the engineering students is great. So we have students who are like fifth year seniors who are their capstone students who work on the products, but then I also have grad students and like PhD as well level students. And so I'm the co-director of the medical device program here. And so the students throughout their entire career here at UC and their co-ops, obviously we go through like extensive safety FDA regulations and things in general for medical device development. And so we apply those same principles to our adaptive sports equipment. It's a little different when you go into the weeds of medical device and the types of medical devices and what safety precautions they need to go through. A lot of our adaptive sports equipment really aren't classified right now in the FDA, but we just follow like what you would for a manual wheelchair or power wheelchair, for example. And so, yeah, they go through validation, verification, safety testing as well, many prototypes. And so it's the whole process, which is awesome. And then if we need a longer process, then sometimes our grad students will pick it up. Sometimes the professional engineers and that I collaborate with here in Cincinnati will also pick up the devices if you would imagine they might need more than a year's time frame to work, which is what our typical time frame is for the students. They get a whole year to work on a project. So yeah, lots of different phases, lots of different exciting things. Sometimes things are made, and if we need to use them like quickly, a lot of our athletes are willing to just sign liability if it's a low risk device. So.
Awesome. Thank you for the answer. If there's any other questions in the chat, feel free to put them in. I had a question myself. So I was wondering, how do you best counsel families who are worried about the safety of, the adaptive athlete and their participation in adaptive sports?
I would say I'm happy to take that one as to start. I'd say that so a lot of the good thing about a lot of adaptive sports programs, there are, I would say, different types of programs. Some of them are actually connected to rehabilitation-based organizations. Some of them are attached to like public nonprofits, community-based nonprofits, and so on. And so there are a lot of different opportunities out there, and some programs have, I would say, more of a kind of a clinical oversight lens than others. So for example, my professional home is the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab in Chicago. We have a large adaptive sports program, and many of the programs, the program staff are actually like physical therapists, for example, or athletic trainers who have a clinical background and really understand that sort of intersection between sport and disability, and ensuring and safety is a huge priority in the programs. So I'd say that what is one benefit of getting involved via a more formal adaptive sports program rather than, for example, just going to the gym on your own. The other thing is just, connecting with, from a parent's perspective, like connecting with your kids as clinicians and clinical providers and just checking in about any concerns that you might have, thinking about it from the standpoint of like an exercise prescription and, how to get involved in a way that they're sure that the sort of dose of sport or physical activity is a safe dose. But for the most part, sometimes when I give talks on this, I say, if you compare, the risk of like safety events or overdoing it versus the risk of not participating at all, the benefits so far outweigh the risks like 99.9% of the time. So most of the time, the imperative is really to get kids out and moving. And if safety concerns do arise, those can always be addressed along the way, but don't let it stop you or get in the way.
Thank you for the answer.
I was just going to add too, part of my like clinical practice is just like I would clear a high school athlete to play soccer or a college athlete to play, football. It's the same thing goes. I'll have a lot of adaptive athletes come to me and say like, hey, I want to play this sport. Can we like review like what I can do, what modifications I might need to make, what equipment I need, and like what risks do I need to be aware of. And that's oftentimes what I do from a clinical standpoint. And a lot, just like your question said, a lot of those discussions are, with the family or with their spouse or a loved one, and they want to know those risks. And I think just having those open conversations and then has been really helpful, and just understanding again, like I'm the physician. But like, obviously I understand the underlying diagnosis and maybe what their risks are. And so it's also a little helpful because then I'm the physician that's actually watching them, actually out in the community playing the sport. So that is also helpful from their ease of mind.
And I would echo what both of you said in terms of the adaptive programs that I've been involved in. I think the support network that's there, I think oftentimes will help allay the fears of the parents or the caregivers, because you have other people in a similar situation entrusting that it's usually for the children, right? Once we have the adult adaptive athlete, they're making their own decisions. But for kids, it's nice to have that community and have other people who've kind of been there and experienced that first fear of letting, I'm watching them, do, Paris snowboard and things off big mountains here in Park City. And it scares me for anybody. But I think that having that community of a reputable organization, there's so many that exist nowadays to get that support for the parents or the caregivers.
Great, thank you all. And there's one last question in the chat. Dr. Jaworski, could you talk more about the team of providers you worked with in Paris in terms of the different types of backgrounds, training experiences everyone had, and how that affected your experience?
Absolutely. So the fun part of the experience in Paris was that none of us knew each other. So we were just a group of people thrown together. Like I mentioned, it was myself, and then we had a orthopedic surgeon from Arizona, and then we had a USOPC employee, an athletic trainer. He was, I apologize, chiropractor he worked at Lake Placid. And then we had 2 athletic trainers, one from New York and one from Atlanta. And then we had a massage therapist from Nebraska. So lots of different walks of life. Some had experience with adaptive athletes, some had not. And so we all kind of came in, and it really is, as with everything with covering a games situation, it's an all hands on deck, and everyone kind of does everything. So our massage therapist probably worked the hardest of any of us. She was the one that was the most popular. She needed a break. Like, we had to let her have time off. And so our athletic trainers would step in and do some treatments as well. And I think really that collaboration was key in all of this. And then, our orthopedic surgeon, the poor guy, he was doing stool samples and checking nasal swabs for people with illness, which is not something he's done probably in a very long time. But that was to give me a break. So I think when you're looking at volunteering for whether it be a World Games or any type of travel, you're often going to be thrown in with people you don't know. And I think the critical piece is that you can get along with others and have that team approach, which I think all of us who are drawn to sports medicine usually have that already kind of in our DNA. So I think that works pretty well.
Great, thank you so much for that answer. So before we conclude tonight's webinar, I want to express our gratitude to tonight's speakers. It has been an honor to moderate and to have Dr. Victoria Heasley, Dr. Cheri Blauwet, and Dr. Carrie Jaworski serve on our speaker panel. This webinar was super inspiring for all of us in attendance, and your presentations were excellent and impactful and inspirational to learn about adaptive sports and the USOPC. I also want to thank everyone attending tonight's webinar. Next week, we have 2 webinars on Tuesday, November 18th at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. We're featuring a presentation by Dr. Brent Pickett on sports ultrasound basics, plus the anatomy for the shoulder, knee, and hip, a comprehensive beginner lecture. And on Thursday, November 20th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, we're featuring 4 AMSSM members that are Paralympic team physicians, and that will be the second installment of our 2-part series on adaptive sports. It has been my pleasure serving as tonight's webinar moderator, and this concludes tonight's webinar. Thank you guys so much.